Clive Shepherd, kicking off the first of our series for 2014. Clive's been in the field for a long time. He's a proper veteran. He is a practitioner. He's been a vendor. He has done a great amount of work in this field. And what I love about Clive is he provides not merely great practical advice, but also a framework for thinking about it all in that makes sense and helps us get our hands around this idea of what blended learning is and how we can make it work for our organisation. So without further ado, let me hand you over to Clive Shepherd, talking us through how to get more than blended learning. Clive.
Don, thank you very much indeed. First of all, I'm going to actually bring over my webcam because I'm going to talk to you for a little while this morning before, excuse me, I show you a lot of slides. So I just want you to welcome to my office here in Brighton, everybody. And first of all, I'd like to just pick up on a bit of serendipitous learning that can occur through the back channel of the text chat, and that is that there's a certain sort of ritual in our house that over breakfast my wife and I do the quick quiz in the local paper. And one of the questions in the quick quiz this morning was, what is the ocean that Perth in Australia is on? And I couldn't work that one out. I have no idea. But I did find out that we have a Pete B in the audience who's from Perth. So I'm hoping, Pete B, you can give me the answer to that question because we're always looking to get our average up. So maybe Indian Ocean. Yes, I did actually guess that. So that's excellent. So that's a classic example of why it's good to be part of live events because you get fortuitous learning. And in a way, that's just one of the issues that comes into planning a blended solution, and I'm going to be talking about that obviously this morning. And it says more than blended learning, and the reason I say that is because, to be honest, the process that I'm going to go through with you to structure the way that you design learning interventions works for any type of learning intervention, not just a blended one, but also it goes well beyond the formal intervention and looks at the way that we can literally blend in formal and informal learning together. So that's what I'm going to go through with you today. And I'm just going to show you one more slide here, which you can see just behind my webcam there, and you can see a sort of pair of legs there. And the reason I'm going to leave that slide up there, the reason I've got the legs, is because I'm going to tell you a little bit of a story. And I'm not going to show you lots of slides. You're just going to have to listen to me. And I want you to see whether this story rings true. It's not actually true, but it's something which I think could easily be true. And so what I want you to imagine is that I came back from a long sort of business trip sometime about a year ago, and you know, my wife's always moaning that we don't seem to do an awful lot of things together. I'm always off over the place, she's always off doing things, and we don't have a lot of sort of hobbies that we do together. So she suggested, why don't we learn about ballroom dancing? Now, I was a little bit horrified at the prospect, to be honest, not being somebody with a great deal of dancing experience, sort of practically none, except when I'm very, very drunk. But my wife is quite keen on dancing, but she thought that's something we could do together. Well, I was in a position of weakness here, having just returned from a long trip and feeling guilty. So I decided that I would go along with this and, okay, let's learn ballroom dancing, and no harm in that. So we went along to the dance school, the local dance school here in Brighton, and we had a consultation with the dance teacher who asked some questions about what our experience was and what sort of things we were interested in and what type of dancing we were interested in. And Marco saying, "Better look great in the ball gown." And you'll never know, Marco. And well, I hope you never know. And so we negotiated what would be the right course for us to go on, what the levels should be, and so on. And the dance teacher gave us some things we could read in advance about the course and about how to prepare for it. Gave me some suggestions of a couple of websites that I could look at, which might help me find out a bit more about ballroom dancing. So anyway, we happily did that. But then the course started, and then that was a sort of an hour a week over about 10, 12 weeks. And the way these sessions went is obviously we went along to the dance school, and basically we picked up a little bit of information each week, and but mainly we spent the time dancing. So in our sessions we pretty well spent, we got lots of practice, found out what we needed to learn, and we got advice as we went along. Now, this was a very well organized dance school because they also had a series of videos which they had produced, which they'd put onto YouTube, and these were videos that we could watch together in between the dance sessions. So we did look at those, and they gave us a little bit of more of a sort of demonstrations and a sort of advice about how to do the dancing, and that was quite fun. But the main thing we did is in the living room spend a lot of time practicing before the next week came up. So this went on over the full 10 weeks, and we made good progress, and really were quite pleased with ourselves, and we'd had lots of practice. So we left the course. Obviously, that was the end of that. Left the classes, and basically we took every opportunity we could to dance with our friends, or we even entered some very junior competitions. But we were quite ambitious at this stage, and trying to perfect our skills. So we had some individual coaching as well from the dance teacher, and this went on over time. One of the best things about it, though, was that we got the opportunity to keep up with all those people that we've been to the classes with, and they became friends of ours. And not only those, but all the other dancers we met with quite a good community, and we shared our experiences, and we talked about dancing and all sorts of other things. So that's my little story, and I'm going to close my webcam now because I want to take you through a sort of, if you like, a sort of debriefing of what went on in that experience. So what we were looking at here was, Stephen says, do I want to borrow your 75 Strat? Yeah, actually I do, Steve. So when you want to bring it round, that's absolutely no problem at all. So I haven't got a Strat. I have got two Gibsons, but I don't have a Fender, so there you go. Maybe you can borrow the Gibson at the same time. This is very distracting. Coming back to this, what I was describing in that case study, if you like, was what I'm calling a skills journey. And let's sort of diagnose what went on in that skills journey. First of all, I'd like to introduce you to this person. So in the text chat, could you give me an idea who this person is? My wife? No, not Margot Fontaine either. Edith Piaf, says Sebastian, and it is in fact Edith Piaf, absolutely. And what was Edith Piaf famous for saying? What was the famous song that she sang? You can give me it in French or English. Je ne regrette rien. Exactly. I have no regrets. And in so many of you in French, that's absolutely brilliant. Yes, that's what her famous saying was. And imagine my surprise when I was developing this particular blended learning framework that I found that the model I was using for the sort of stages in a blend spelt out the word Piaf. So immediately I thought, well, you don't often get luck like this. So I thought, well, I can say that this course is no regrets learning, that this is the way to make sure that when you design your blended solutions, there are no regrets. Excuse me. So this is what Piaf stands for in my particular framework: preparation, input, application, and follow-up. Excuse me while I have a little bit of water. And I'm going to explain what those, how those work in the context of the skills journey that I just went on. Serendipity again, absolutely. So the skills journey that we saw had, as I say, those four phases: preparation, input, application, and follow-up. So let's see what's meant to happen in those phases. In the preparation phase, the intention is that essentially you're aligning the student with the program. You're making sure that the student's properly prepared for the program and that the program is properly prepared for the student. So what happened? Well, we had the discussion with the dance teacher. We reviewed information about the course, and I did some background reading. Now, in the input phase, you're trying to create a sort of excuse me, act as a catalyst for essentially application. You're trying to spur the user into doing something new. And the input phase in this particular program was the group classes, but also, rather nicely, the videos which we watched independently. In the application phase, the intention is that you put that into practice in a sort of realistic context. And in the case of this skills journey, that was lots and lots of practice at home, essentially. And then this sort of looped round and round, as longer blended learning interventions will do, that basically, you have a little bit of input, you apply that in some practical way, and then you have another bit of input and you apply it in a different way. And that's the huge benefit there was of this being 10 short sessions over one per week rather than one long session. And that obviously meant that at the end of 10 weeks you're getting quite a long way along the way with building your skills. Because that's really just the sort of formal element of the program. The follow-up's very important too, because that's when you're really embedding those skills. And this is where we went back for some individual coaching. We're now putting these skills to practice in a sort of routine way by dancing for fun and competitively. But we're also engaging with our peers, sharing experiences with other dancers. Let's try and analyze that framework against a number of different models. First of all, you may have heard of the idea of courses and resources. Well, in this case, the majority of what's in those first three columns we can regard as a course of some form. As we moved into application and follow-up, it becomes resources. Because the model doesn't really show the relative importance of those, because the resources go on and the follow-up phase goes on for a long time into the future. It's not limited to just a few weeks. Another way we can explore this is against that old model which looks at consciousness and competence. I'm sure many of you would have seen this before. And it says that sort of right at the beginning there, we're in a situation of unconscious incompetence. We've got very little idea about what we don't know. We think it's probably very easy to learn ballroom dancing. In fact, it's not easy at all. As we find out when we get to the course that we enter a stage of conscious incompetence where we, to excuse my coughing, I'm not quite sure how to stop it other than drinking a bit of water. But we enter a phase of conscious incompetence where we now realize we're absolutely hopeless at this, and that it's going to be a long journey to build skills, as it always is. And I think one of the important lessons about teaching skills is you've got to be patient. Skills don't come overnight. Skills take time. Over a period, you're gradually developing a competence, but you're still very conscious of that competence. You're still having to try very hard and think very carefully about what you're doing. But in time, as you enter the follow-up phase, you start to be unconsciously competent. In fact, you don't even realize that you learnt this skill. It just seems like you've always had that skill. So that's how that particular model maps to the skills journey.
Clive, do you want to take a moment to just have a breath,
yes.
grab a glass of water, leave this slide up, get people to contemplate it, and perhaps we could ask a question for people which they can discuss while you practice the art of deep breathing for a moment to regain yourself. So,
well, I'll tell you what, Don, let me ask a question which I think could get people going. The question I'd like to ask is, what we've seen is the sort of thing that could easily happen in terms of learning how to ballroom dance. What I would like people to think about is, how might this have been structured if this was a corporate intervention? If this had been something which a big organization had put together, how might it have looked? It wouldn't have looked like this. So that's something to think about while I just get myself together.
All right, so I like the question. If a corporation had put together something like this, Clive says it would have looked different. How would it look? What differences would there be? And the hashtag is #LSG Webinar. And Joe's first comment is, we always let ourselves down with the follow-up. And Adam says, no, you'd have one course. Full stop, that's what you do. Plonk everybody in and get them to do it. Paul is saying, no, e-learning, classroom, then the exam. And there's a very good point by Helen, of course. No one's going to let people out of the workplace for 10 weeks in a row. Other people saying, look, we're not going to have enough follow-up. We never seem to have enough follow-up. And some sort of cynical views of the world of e-learning, it would be largely click and read exercise or multiple choice exercises. And some people saying we'd have online stuff first to get people into place to think about it before they did it. And a lot of focus here, Clive, if you're coming back in with it.
Yeah, just coming in.
On the follow-up, a lot of focus on the follow-up, or the lack of it, I should say.
Yeah.
And I like Scott's point. The business would say, what a waste of time. What's your take on the really, I think, quite practical answers we're getting from people, Clive?
Well, okay. I think the best way of answering is I put together what I thought it might look like. Let me see if I can get to that in just a second. And then you can compare your solutions with what I think a corporate solution might look like. So just give me a few minutes. First of all, I would like to just talk about the fact that in this particular solution with the ballroom dancing, there were a number of ways in which we were blending. Now, often when we think about blending, we just think about, we'll have a bit of e-learning, we'll follow it with a bit of classroom or something like that. But one of the important ways that you can blend is by what I call social context. In other words, who you're learning with. So sometimes it's very advantageous to learn on your own with all the flexibility that that gives. Sometimes it's very useful to have one-to-one contact so that you can get individual attention and confidential feedback. Sometimes it's very useful to learn with in a cohort with a group of other people who are doing the same thing as you. And sometimes it's good to reach out to the wider community and to share, as you would do typically these days using social tools. So I just want to see how that maps to this particular intervention. First of all, there are quite a few elements which were done individually, or in the case of, in this particular example, with just the two of us who are doing the dancing lessons. So there's the reviewing of the information about the course, the background reading, etc., etc. That was all done individually, and that made sense. Some of this was one-to-one, the discussion with the dance teacher at the beginning and the individual coaching. Some of it was group work, which was obviously the classes that we went to. And some of it was reaching out to the broader community and sharing experience with other dancers. And somehow or other that creates a nice balance. And blended learning is all about balance. It's about getting the key elements that make a difference in balance and not overdoing one at the expense of the other. So you can see that there are different social contexts that you quite freely move between. Another way that this experience blended was in the teaching strategy. In other words, what were the ways that were put in place for that learning to happen? And there's a number of these which I'd like to suggest to you. One is just simply exposition, just giving the information to somebody. Some of it is more formal instruction. It's got definite objectives and definite structure. Some of it you might call guided discovery. It's almost like setting up situations and then debriefing them and reviewing them. And some of it is essentially just saying, go on, get out there and look for yourself. So there were different strategies there that could be employed. And all of these were employed to some degree. So exposition was essentially just the information that that was given about the course and the background reading. There was the whole central element of the classes was essentially instruction. It was about skill building with an instructor. There was the coaching and the dancing that went alongside that was essentially guided discovery, in that we would set objectives in the coaching sessions and then debrief what happened when we met next time. Whereas the sharing experience with other dancers was a strategy of exploration. And again, you can see that there's been a very a nice balance between using different strategies at different phases in that intervention. It seems like just a very simple intervention, and it is. Let's compare that with what you might get in a corporate context. Let's see whether what you thought would be the case would be the case. So the corporate version of this course might look like this. Preparation phase, some joining instructions. The input phase, a 2-day dance workshop made about 1.5 days of theory. There one practice session per pair while others observe and provide feedback. I'm sure we've all been there. Application, well, that's up to you if you want to do that. And, follow-ups, some printed handouts for reference. Now, I might be a little bit tongue-in-cheek here, and you would never put together an intervention like this, but it happens, and it happens a lot. The problem is that, first of all, there's inadequate preparation. The input phase is all about content, when it should be about, actually practicing things and getting feedback and relating to other people. There's no actual structure behind application, and no follow-up to make sure that the skills are actually introduced. So what happens is you might have a reasonable time at the workshop, probably be a bit frustrating because you'd want to do more dancing, or you'd find that sort of practicing where everybody watched far too embarrassing. And the main thing is, of course, it would die. You would no way you would have learned how to dance. So the skills journey, and the reason I think blended learning is so important and so relevant today is because it's about an end-to-end experience, about a balance between different types of activities, different types of strategies to make sure that you achieve your objectives. Okay, I'm going to move on because not everything is about skills. Although I would just like to show you this, which is, let's map that in unconscious incompetence bit. The difference here is that we never left conscious incompetence, because all that happened is we went on the dance workshop, found out we were no good, and then we went home again, and that was the end of it. So that wasn't going to happen. So what I want to do is look at a different type of course, the type of type of intervention, which is the sort of thing which many of us are asked to do. And it's not about building skills; it's about building essentially a knowledge of what you could call big ideas. And a lot of what we train in companies is actually about big ideas. So by ideas-based learning, I mean topics like project management, for example, marketing, business management, diversity and inclusion, things like this, health and safety even, where it isn't so much the content, it's not so much about the knowledge, it's about you buying into an idea, and or buying into often a series of ideas. And we often get mistakenly, I think, concentrate on the knowledge that's behind that, when really what we're trying to do is win over somebody so that they change their behavior. And people aren't going to change their behavior just from knowledge. In fact, you can imagine that I might want somebody to structure their meetings better by always having an objective for their meeting, and I can tell them that it's good practice to have an objective for a meeting. That doesn't mean they're going to do it. It just means that intellectually they know that that's the convention, that you should have an objective for a meeting. They haven't bought into that. It hasn't shifted their behavior in any way. So we're not going to shift behavior by just talking about giving the knowledge. So another way we have, another important reason for the blend is that it takes time to shift ideas and to get people to buy into ideas, and we need different strategies. Now I'm going to take a typical example of, now here's a little bit of bullshit bingo for you, those of you who like looking at this sort of thing. This is the sort of brief you might get for a leadership course. Here's what we need. Middle managers who are capable of delivering results in a fast-moving business environment through cohesive teamwork and motivated, high-performing direct reports. Well, let's say that we work out what that means, and we think, well, okay, we do need to do something in terms of leadership, and we need to do something which is going to change behavior, which is going to get people to buy into some important ideas about leadership. Now, there are a million ways you could go about doing this, but I've structured an example of an intervention just to show quite simply other ways that you can blend. So let's go through that. First of all, we can't do anything until we've got some information. So what more information do we need? You can give me some ideas in the text chat. What more information do we need before we can design an intervention? Just give me a few keywords.
Clive, I'm a great believer in repeating your question, so just make it quite clear what we're asking. What are we asking people right now?
What we're asking is, if we want to move on and design an intervention based on this brief, what sort of information do we need? Because this isn't enough. We can't design intervention just from this one paragraph. So
and yet very often it's exactly what we get, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
And
so we've got some good answers coming in here.
Absolutely, yeah.
What are the core competencies at this level? What the outcome is? What's not happening right now?
What are the needs?
Yeah, the needs.
I love Kate's one. What problem is this the solution to? I like that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good question. Sometimes that you get the right question, it unlocks everything. How many people? What are the level currently? A lot of people are asking questions about prior knowledge, and I think those are important, as well as end goals. What are they currently
Adam's
doing?
one, is this something new, or is it something that's not being done well? So that's a clear difference between two things, which people don't often differentiate in their minds.
Absolutely, yes, exactly.
How
will we measure it?
A lot of people are saying, how do we measure it? What does good look like? What does results mean? There's
Absolutely.
Yeah, gosh.
Okay, well, look, thanks, guys. I'm going to just, I'm going to show you the information that I was given. This is what I found out. And I've done it against 3 headings, using each of which conveniently begin with an L, just to make it easy to remember: the learning, the learners, and the logistics. And this is the information that I got. What we want them to have is insights into the sort of dynamics of effective leadership. And I think the key word there is insights, rather than knowledge about leadership. More awareness, self-awareness of their own abilities, and definitely skills in interacting in a wide variety of leadership situations. That's what I got in terms of the learning. In terms of, one more, there's always another one, and the confidence to apply that thinking back to their work, which I think is an interesting one. It's not, confidence is not usually a learning word, but I think it probably should be. What do we know about the managers? All right, vary a lot in terms of experience. They're responsible for teams of up to 10. They're very variable in terms of their leadership awareness. Some will have had leadership training before, and very different levels of motivation. So it's a very heterogeneous team of people, quite tricky to deal with. 150 people. We need to get it done in 24 months, and there's as much money as we need to do the job properly, which is always nice. That's just a fantasy I put in there. And I think that the key thing I wanted to put across here is we don't need to know the details of this case essentially now. It's just that clearly you can't base a blended solution on just a couple of sentences, that you need to delve in. You need to find out a lot more about what business need is the learning designed to support. Where is that? What type of learning is it that you're looking to achieve? How you would be able to measure that? What do you know about the learners, particularly things about their prior knowledge and about their motivation and about their sort of hopes and fears around this topic? But also, what are the constraints logistically that we're working in terms of time and budget and numbers and so on? And, so we can't design without this information. So I don't think in this particular structured framework there's any excuse for not doing a proper analysis. So let's just go through what is a typical way that you might approach an ideas adventure. And as I say, there's no such thing as a right answer here. There are endless ways you could do this, and people are going to have very different views. But the analysis would be the same, and the technique for determining the blends is going to be the same. It's just we're obviously going to make different choices based on our particular experience and our understanding of what this information tells us. So let's start with the preparation phase. Well, what's some things we could do? We could do, first of all, we could do a 360-degree survey for each of these people, which we would clearly do online. We could ask them to sit down with their own managers and set goals, which they could do whichever way practical. They could do some background reading. Why not? Perhaps managers may not read very often, but they might on this occasion, which could be some sort of print or ebook, etc. We would like them to make contact with the other people they're going to be going through the program with, perhaps through a VLE or some other sort of environment. And all right, so this is a typical sort of preparation phase. Nothing revolutionary about that, but I'm interested in explaining how that was analyzed. It was analyzed in terms of methods and media, and the important thing here is that we start with methods. We look at what the activities need to be to achieve our objectives at the preparation phase. And then in terms of media, all we're doing is essentially saying what is a sort of an efficient way of delivering that particular element of the blend. We're not being driven by technology. We're not being driven by the fact that everything should be online or everything should be face-to-face. What we're saying is what's the most practical way of delivering each of those elements. And you just come up with a practical solution. But at the same time, we've already talked about blending by social context. We talked about blending by strategy. Here we're blending in another way. We're blending by the delivery channel, if you like. In other words, how much of this is going to be face-to-face, how much of it's going to be offline, in the sense of techniques like, when I say offline, I don't mean face-to-face, I mean using media like books and CDs and so on, which is not going to be that often these days. How much is going to be online? And essentially, we want to make the right choices amongst those three media channels. And the reason is because they have very different efficiencies. And we want to use the most efficient and flexible media without compromising our design in any way. So when we choose the media in that second column, we're looking for something that's practical and flexible, but isn't compromising on the quality. So what elements here have we used of that? Well, the goal setting with our own manager may well be face-to-face. The offline, is there anything offline? Yeah, well, people might use an ebook or print to do some reading. And of course, the rest of it's online. So, as I say, the blending between face-to-face and online and offline media is all about flexibility and efficiency, but never at the expense of quality. So where it really is absolutely essential for something to be face-to-face, we do it face-to-face. We never compromise on that, and I think that's important too. Let's move on to the second phase here, which is the input phase, which again is going to loop round with application. So what might we do? Well, we could have, I think we're probably going to have some sort of, lots of group activities and discussion. And believe it or not, I'm actually going to do a face-to-face workshop. Sorry about that. It's just that I think that it's necessary to get the right balance in here to make the point. But I actually think that probably would work in some cases anyway. Also some individual reading and viewing, which they can do online. That's really all that we're going to do in terms of input. So again, how have we split the media there? We've got a face-to-face element, and we've got a face-to-face element because we believe that we can't achieve what we want without being face-to-face. Now, there may well be a design that would work online, of course, but I think that the argument that could be made here is that, first of all, a lot of those activities would be quite protracted, quite long activities, and would be quite tiresome to do online. But also, it needs to be, there's quite a lot of attitudinal issues to deal with. I don't know about you, but I would not want to handle negative attitudinal issues in a virtual classroom like we're in today. I'd want to do that. I'd want to do that face-to-face, eyeball to eyeball, and the online element there, of course. Okay, let's move on to the third phase. And in this case, we're going to stay in the second phase just for a minute, sorry. That's to say that there's another fourth way, and this is the last way I'm thinking that you can blend, which is by what I'm calling communication mode. In other words, when we look at those media, the workshops and the online media and the books and ebooks and what have you, they can be analyzed in two categories. And those of you who are learning technology aficionados will be familiar with these terms, the concepts of synchronous and asynchronous media, or if we use ordinary English, same-time media, where it happens at, where we're actually diarized to be meeting at the same time, and own-time activities where we actually control when the activities take place. So again, we've got a mixture. It's interesting that that's happened. So we've got, the face-to-face workshops are a same-time activity, a synchronous activity. And that's because there's a sort of emotional charge about synchronous activities, which there isn't about asynchronous. There is, people want to be there at the time things happen. You're here at this webinar, you're not watching a recording, listening to a recording. That's because you think that there's something about being there in the moment. And that's why I think blends need some same-time activities. Not every blend, but certainly longer blends like this, balanced with the own time activities, the more reflective activities where you get the chance to take your time and do things when it suits you. So again, that's that fourth way we've blended. We've blended by social context, we've blended by strategy, we've blended by delivery channel, and we've blended by the communication mode. So that's 4 different ways that we are blending. And we're trying, all of those are giving us little hints about what's the right balance. Let's just quickly look through the rest of this blend in the ideas adventure. So definitely there's going to be individual and group assignments, and group assignments are particularly effective in this case, which they would carry out by whatever means were necessary, but submit them on the virtual learning environment. Review sessions, which we would do in a tool like this. Individual reflection, which we'd ask people to maintain a blog on the virtual learning environment. And again, what have we done in terms of same time and own time? We've got a same time element, which is the review sessions, and we've got an own time element, which is the individual reflection, but actually also the assignments. Let's go on to the follow-up phase. Another repeat of the 360-degree survey, another review session with their manager to see how things have gone, a final assessment. Now, here's something which I've actually been doing with a client this year. It's created quite a bit of anxiety because it's so different from what they've done before. But looking at longer ideas-based programs, rather than assessing them on the basis of some sort of, test or exam or something like that, we've been, in this particular example with this client, we've been assessing people or certifying people as having completed the program only on the basis of their manager agreeing that they've demonstrated the required competence actually on the job in the real environment, which means that sometimes it's taking months for people to actually be able to get their certificate for the program. On the other hand, it means that it actually has got somewhere near achieving its objective, as opposed to some rather trivial interim objective like knowledge. So that's something you might like to think about in your own longer programs that you put together. Okay, so I had to work you through that a little bit quickly, and I'm sorry that it did have to be a bit quick. I'm conscious we need some time for questions, but I'm just going to try and summarize, if that's all right.
I'm racking up the questions here. There's plenty to talk about, so yeah, please do.
I'm going to be very quick. Fantastic. I'm just going to very quickly summarize what I think we mean by more than blended learning. And this is just a simple list for you. And first of all, it means end-to-end solutions that blend in, you forgive the pun, the formal and the informal. They're embedded in the real world. They're not just about courses, they're about resources. They're about not just about knowledge, they're about demonstrated skill and demonstrated ability to use new ideas. It's about selecting the right social context so you get the right levels of support and flexibility at each stage. So you're learning with the right people when you need to be with those people. Using the right strategies to make sure the objectives are achieved for the particular audience. You're using the right delivery channels so that you get the efficiencies and the flexibility and scalability as well without compromising on effectiveness. And you're choosing communication modes, the same time, own time, to ensure the right balance of urgency in the sense of the same time activities and reflectiveness for the own time. And finally, this works for any learning intervention, blended or not. So it's more than blended learning. This sort of framework can work for anything. But of course, it's very hard to imagine that you can really create an end-to-end solution without a blend. It's very hard to envisage that. So Don, I'm happy to pass over to you now for questions.
Fantastic. And look, Clive at onlignment.com. Check him out on LinkedIn. Check him out on Twitter. It's Clive Shepherd. And you need to follow him because he's a good guy who's, as he was explaining during this, not only thinks about it, actually does it. And Clive, first question, somebody said, what is blended learning? I threw out a definition very quickly. Any form of learning program with more than one medium of delivery of content was the fastest response I could come up with.
Well, of course, there are lots of different definitions, but I've really provided today an enhanced view of what blending is. It's not just blending delivery channels, which is what you're essentially suggesting there, Don. I think a lot of people would be happy with that definition of mixing delivery channels, which is essentially elements which are face-to-face, elements which are online, and so on. It just isn't enough to get the balance you need. There are lots of other things that need balancing. So I think that what I would say is that it's a learning intervention that has a number of contrasting elements in it. So it might be contrasting social context, contrasting strategies, contrasting communication modes as well.
Okay, that's brilliant. I put the summary slide back up there because everyone was asking for it, but I've stuck your email in there. I love that idea. It's not just about mixing the different delivery mechanisms, it's a contrast, and through the contrast, you actually get a greater perspective on what you're learning. Thank you so much. That's a really good way of putting it together. Okay, lots of stuff here. Very quickly, emotion. Michelle said, look, if synchronous activities have an emotional charge, then, which is why people like a good workshop, then how much more difficult is it, Clive, to get an emotional response in asynchronous activities when you're not with people?
Well, I mean, obviously we're talking about not just physical classrooms as being synchronous. What we're doing today is synchronous. But the question is that with asynchronous activities, I'm not saying that the only way you can get an emotional charge is through being synchronous, but there is a certain little extra thing about being there with other people at the time something is happening. But I think that lots of other things create emotional charge. Probably the most important thing is relevance to your real life situation. And if you realize that there's a gap in what you can do or what you know, and that's really relevant to your successful performance on the job or your something in your personal life, then your emotional level will go up because you're desperately keen to find a solution to that problem. But of course you can do it lots of ways. So you could, in a film, we can see how emotional charge can be raised by the storylines and by the use of music and things like that. So there are lots of other ways of doing it, but we really have to be quite we've got to be good designers to be doing it, because certainly some people believe, certainly Nick Shackleton-Jones, whose opinion I value very highly, believes that what he calls the affective context, in other words, the emotional context of the situation, is very important to what we will remember. So if there isn't any emotional context, then it's very, very difficult to remember anything.
Absolutely, and that's affective with an A, isn't it?
Yeah.
Claudine's raised her hand. If you want to ask a question, we're not passing microphones around. Please do go ahead and type them, and I'll pass them over to Clive. A bunch of questions coming through, but I want to go back to one that was asked earlier. A lot of people talking about a key question, which is who has control. Magdalena, Teresa Rode, Chris Rutherford, Michelle, Steve, Laura, all had a different angle on this, which was essentially, look, it's a nice idea that people do follow-up.
Yeah.
Should it depend on the learner, or should they be forced to it by the manager?
Yeah.
How do the managers enable them to be smart enough to do it, or do they give them time to do it? And Teresa said, look, Clive's talking about a personal choice. Very often, learners don't have a personal choice. So there's quite a bit of a story here about who's in charge.
Yep.
How does that affect, Clive, this approach to blended learning?
Well, it affects it a great deal because in many respects, if you're a learning professional, you don't have much control about what happens other than in that input phase, sometimes a little bit in terms of preparation. You might be able to control a little bit of application, but mostly you're about the input. And there are a great many learning professionals who don't want to have an awful lot of input, a lot of influence beyond that. They'd rather just run a program and move on to the next one. But it does require a different sort of relationship between learning professionals and the organization in which they're working. There's got to be, there are a number of stakeholders who all have to be in on this and have to be prepared to play their part. So, for example, when I was talking about the project I'm working on where we were asking people to be assessed on the basis of their competence back at work rather than, within the context of a course, the managers had to be involved in this right from the very beginning. They had to know how that program was being structured. They had to know what their role was within it, because it's not just assessing whether the person's demonstrating the competence, it's doing something about it if they're not demonstrating the competence.
Yeah.
That means coaching or organizing coaching, things like that. So you cannot operate this sort of the extended end-to-end blended process that I've described without everybody being in on what's happening and buying into it. So there's quite an ideas adventure before, just to get the this process off the ground. But on the other hand, you're going to end up with things that actually make a difference. There's one particular program I'm thinking of with the clients I'm working with, where the way that application's been structured within the blend means that groups of people are going off and actually changing things in the organization around the ideas of the program as part of the program. It's a bit like a sort of action learning group. But it means that the program is almost fluidly part of the experience of improving performance in the organization, rather than just being seen as a course.
Sorry, I was only half listening, Clive, because there's been this deluge of stuff coming through. Yeah. I'm going to assume you've answered the question brilliantly, of course, because we've had a very interesting point. Your point about the assessment part, and managers being signing it off effectively when they're confident, not that people have reached some sort of vague sense of competency, but when they can see the behaviours being exhibited, which effectively is competence, we'd hope. Now, a bunch of questions from Carolyn, Teresa Rose, Paul, and others around this. It's an interesting approach. So firstly, do you need guidance for managers in some way? How do you make sure and I think that's really important, that there is some form of objective view of what good looks like. So how do you make sure they have that? Teresa Rose says, well, they've tried to do it in their organisation. The support isn't there to make it happen. But Paul says, if you don't have that, and how do you know that you've been effective or not? So quite a lot going on. What are your thoughts, Clive?
Well, I absolutely agree that managers need to be properly briefed, and they would need a set of criteria by which to measure performance. The way that it works in the example I'm talking about is that at some stage after the formal element of the program, the learner suggests to their manager that they believe that they have reached the particular competencies, and these are obviously written down, these competencies, and provides evidence that they believe that they have reached those competencies if the manager hasn't actually been able to observe it directly. So it might be that they, I think to say a portfolio would be overdoing it, although that would be the case perhaps in a major situation. But essentially they give evidence of why they think that they have actually demonstrated the competence, and the manager has a list of those competencies and say yes or no. They might say, no, I think you need to do a bit more work on this, and then we'll have another look at it. And that should be really integrated into the performance management process too. And I know you may not get buy-in for a process like this, but you'd have to say, and I think as was suggested by one of the people here, that if you don't, then
what the hell are you spending your money on? Sorry, pardon my French.
You might be better off actually just not bothering.
Yeah, but of course the other side to that, the counter-argument to that, which we often face is, then the reason why we're buying this stuff, the reason why we're doing it, is that we know it works.
Yeah.
Which is rather frustrating. Speaking about cost, Christiana Merle said, look, how do you calculate the costs for this, what you're suggesting, Clive, including all the preparation work? On the other side of the coin, Shirley is saying, look, the frustration for me is that very often the budgets and timescales for the budgets and timescales usually define the blend or lack of it, quality sacrifice to get the job done at a certain cost and in a certain time. So can you talk to us about money, Clive?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that there's a sort of fantasy that is that all these phases go on anyway, and all the courses is the little bit in the middle, but all these other things happen. But of course we know they don't. In many cases, the impetus of this structure is necessary. Measuring cost is very tricky. I don't think measuring the bits that the learning professionals are responsible for is actually any different, and it's not certainly no reason why it should be any more expensive. But of course, when you're looking at the amount of time that people might need to put into assignments and projects and stuff like that, and managers put into doing their assessment, then strictly speaking, you should measure that in. And it probably is going to mean there's more time from members of from people in the business. But so I think the assumption was that was always being done anyway. But of course, we know it wasn't. I don't think money is. I have never known anybody say that money was an obstacle to that. What I have seen somebody say, Don, is that contracting is a bit like organizational development. Contracting is necessary, and that's certainly a part of it. And part of the project I've been alluding to is that there is a sign-off at the beginning of a contract from the learner's point of view and the manager's point of view, and they're reminded about those commitments throughout.
Yes, I'm a great believer in contract, actually, the idea of making an explicit relationship between people, because it, apart from anything else, it makes people think, oh gosh, actually this isn't like what I've always thought learning is, what I did for the first 15 years of my life, sit in a class and listen to people. It's a bit different.
Yeah.
Steve Goodwin says, get rid of the training calendar. Actually, that's another way of doing the same sort of thing. Rob Sayers had a good point he made earlier on, which has just popped up again in a conversation he's having with Shehzad, which is about coaching and mentoring. And Rob's talking particularly about moving people from incompetence to competence, and providing coaching during that process. And he says, look, surely it's got a role, and he's found high-impact blended approach warrants attention during the first contact with the subject area. Help people get through that difficult transition point. And says that in conversation with Shehzad that self-coaching, he's suggesting, can be very effective, but you may need additional extra coaching on the outside. What's your view about coaching and all this, Clive?
Yeah, well, coaching was part of the skills journey blend that I talked about earlier, and it could easily have been part of the leadership one too. And I think it's what, just to go back to what I was saying earlier about social context, one of the social contexts was one-to-one. And I think that one-to-one learning is expensive, obviously. Coaching and on-job instruction is expensive. But it doesn't have to be that extensive. It can be quite small inputs. And I'm a great believer that those one-to-one elements used judiciously in the blend are going to make a difference. So I'm entirely behind the idea of coaching.
Very good. And I'm delighted to hear it. I think we probably all would be. One issue, of course, is coaching is a bit like writing, something everyone imagines they can do, but all too often one discovers that there are better and perhaps slightly variable quality of coaching going on.
Well, absolutely, and I think there's also, to support blends like I'm describing today, there is a need for people to be a little bit more aware, not about learning professionals, but everybody else in the organisation, about what learning really means and what teaching really means, and the difficulty with which people, you do change ideas or improve skills. So one of the elements of the same project I'm talking about is a course called Learning and Teaching, which is a very short course which includes an element on coaching, and it's designed exactly for that purpose. It's a sort of background to the whole program.
Very quickly, Scott says, what pitfalls to avoid? That's it? That's the question.
Well, I think the usual pitfalls in a blend are that that you're being driven by efficiencies. In other words, you're saying, well, really, we've got a course which is too long. We want to make it shorter, and we'll do some bits like using something E. It's more. There's a lot more to it than this. And I think the key thing is the pitfall is that you start making a compromise. You reduce quality to improve efficiency, whereas the process that I've taken you through is about setting the what you regard to be the givens if it's going to be highly effective, and then once you've decided what's necessary for it to be highly effective, then you look for the most efficient way of delivering it, and that way you'll always be producing a quality product. A blend isn't just a second best.
For me, Clive, that comes to a much bigger question, which isn't actually your methodology. Mm-hmm. It's about your relationship with the organisation, which I believe we could spend an entire year talking about. And we will be tackling that in the future. But how you tackle the organisation is actually at the root of many of the questions, such as Christina asked, which is, look, very often we are simply facing the fact that people don't have enough time. But if they don't have enough time, the root of that is the organisational approach to skills development and performance.
Absolutely, yeah. It's better to do fewer courses properly than lots of courses superficially, I think.
You're absolutely right, Clive. I've seen this happen in so many organisations. The L&D department concentrates on one area, suddenly it starts to win its spurs and gets taken very seriously and is given license then to expand its operations. But if you're doing lots of things, if you're spreading yourself too thin, you haven't got enough to make an effect anywhere. Yeah. Let's pick up on a couple of other points. Sorry, a couple of people are asking, do we have the slides available? Yes.
Yep.
Slides, webinar, recording, and chat will all be available afterwards. Okay. Sorry, I just want to quickly jump out to Mike, because what I do is I collect the questions as they go on.
Yeah.
Scott asked another question, which is it's slightly vague. You could talk about this for an hour, but I'm going to ask you to finish it in 30 seconds. What thought processes do you go through when deciding what blend you should do for a particular learning intervention?
Well, I've described 4 sort of balances you're looking to strike, and they're on the screen there at the moment: social context, strategies, delivery channels, communication modes. But the thought process is really is not about sitting there in a sort of, like some mad creative just fantasizing about. There's a very definite relationship between the information you gather about the 3 L's, the learning, the learners, and logistics, and what you end up with. In fact, often, once you've done a proper analysis and you really know what you need to know about the learners, learning, and the logistics, the blend almost sort of comes out. So it's not. I think that it's about getting the right information and knowing what the implications of that information are. But also, you also got to have the desire to create end-to-end experiences, and I think that's you've got to believe in that yourself and believe that you're prepared to make that happen, even though the organisation won't be.
Actually, Clive, that's a great point to finish on. This is a fantastic methodology. But it's not about the methodology. This will work when you believe that you can have the conversations with the business that empower you to make it effective and to have the right conversations with managers at the beginning to set the right value of what good looks like, and at the end when you make sure the follow-up's working right.
Yeah.
Already people are saying thank you to Clive. I noticed Rob has also said that he's noted that Arsenal, my team, did a very poor performance against Manchester United yesterday, so thank you, Rob, for bringing that up.
There was a time when 0-0 against Manchester United might have been regarded as a good result.
I know, very sad, isn't it? Clive, let's go forward to wrap up with your video to play us out.
Perhaps you just expand that out.
There we go.
Dom.
There we go. So Clive's prepared a little MP4, and we'll listen to this.
There you go. I hope that woke you up.
It's still playing for me.
Oh, okay.
I think it's going to be playing. Yes, the whole thing will be available. This is recorded as part of the recording. That's fantastic. I was sort of expecting a remix of Edith Piaf singing Non je ne regrette rien to a heavy dub beat. Let's thank Clive once again, people. Thank you so much. Clive, this is what you get when you've got somebody who really knows what they're talking about and is sharing plenty of experience in the real world and plenty of thinking about it, and we get tremendous value out of it. Clive, thank you so much. Thank you everybody who's attending for your thoughts and your contribution as well. Really rich chat going on. Clive@onlignment.com is the email address to get hold of Clive on. And let me just wrap up. If you've enjoyed it, that's the hashtag, #LSG Webinar on Twitter. Plenty of people asking, how can I get hold of it, etc., etc. I can tell you, that's the URL, www.learningandskillsgroup.com. It's free. Go to the webinar archive tab, and you'll get the things. I've just put the URL into the chat area. And guess what? Just when you thought you couldn't get any more fun, in slightly less than an hour's time, we've got another webinar coming up on the LSG series. top 5 things to consider when creating an e-learning course. Guys, once again, thank you very much for your contribution today. Invaluable, as always. Clive, thank you for bringing your experience and your thinking to bear. I think this is only the beginning of what should be a great year, 2014, for blended learning. Thanks for kicking it off for us, Clive. Okay, see you, I hope, at 12 o'clock UK time.